We talked about the major components of culture, from music to sports to our style of dress and to religion. We talked about some of the major religions of the world. I did get a chance to go through your guys' contributions to the discussion board on religion. You guys posed some really good questions, and there were even a few of you who answered the questions and had some really good answers and some thought-provoking questions. I will try and get in and answer some of those either today or tomorrow. So if you really want your question answered and are looking for a response, check back in the discussion board later today. I'll do my best to try and answer those. So at this point, hopefully you have a good understanding of some of the major religions of the world. And now what we're going to talk about is when you have two different groups of people. And by different, I mean it could be the language they speak, it could be their religious beliefs, their political affiliation, even just their style of dress or their mannerisms, their customs. What happens when you put those two groups of people in close contact with one another, in close proximity to one another? It usually revolves in conflict. So the point of this, guys, is to hopefully give you an understanding, a better appreciation of what's going on in the world today, because I'm going to highlight 6 conflicts that are either taking place today or have taken place recently, so that when you guys discuss current events in a class, when you read the news, whether it's on your phone or in the newspaper, watch TV, hopefully after this you'll have a better understanding of what's going on in the world. And the nice thing about summer school geography is that I can kind of craft the course on my own. And I wrestled with, should I just talk about one conflict and go into really good detail about one conflict, or should I try and hit a few and not go into as much detail? You know, if we're talking about 6, we're not gonna be able to spend time on just one of them, a whole lot of time on one of them. And so what I came up with is we're gonna talk about 6 events. I'm gonna give you some background information, why it's important, and then I'm also gonna provide a link to each if you wanna read or watch more about it. Okay? So are there any questions before we begin? All right. So here's 6 cultural conflicts that have either taken place today or have taken place recently. The first one is known as the Rwanda genocide. Rwanda is this tiny country. If you follow my mouse, if you look at this map of Africa on the right-hand side here, Rwanda is labeled in red. It's near Uganda and the Congo. It's south of Nigeria, north of South Africa, using relative location right there. It's south of the Sahara Desert. Okay, so Rwanda is a tiny country that's really divided between 2 cultural groups. And you have to keep in mind that these 2 groups of people both share something. They're both Rwandans. You know, they have a common background. Their people came from the same area, but they're different in their physical appearance and the types of jobs that they perform. So these two groups of people were known as the Hutus and the Tutsis. And kids sometimes laugh at the names, but the names are reflective of African culture and the Rwandan culture. So the Hutus make up the majority of the population in the country. They compose roughly 85% of the population, meaning like 8 out of every 10 people in Rwanda is a Hutu. But the Tutsis are a minority in the country. They tend to be more farmers, people living in the countryside, and the Tutsis are taller, more slender, they have longer noses, and they kind of stand out from the rest of the population because they're a minority. Only about 1 in every 10 people are Tutsis, and you can pick them out based on their physical appearance. So the reason I bring this up is because Rwanda, like many African countries, was colonized in the early 1900s, meaning taken over by an outside power. The outside power that took over Rwanda was the Belgians. The Belgians took over Rwanda in the early 1900s, and they put people in charge. because Belgium is a country way up in Europe, and since it was so far away, what they decided to do is we're going to put some locals in charge, and then we're going to use that country for their natural resources and things that we need. And so instead of sharing power between Hutus and Tutsis, what they did is the Belgians put just the Tutsis in charge. They picked them to run the country, to run the banks. They gave them important jobs. They gave them all the good paying jobs. And so if you were a Hutu, remember the Hutu make up the vast majority of people in the country, you would be pretty upset with this, wouldn't you? Like the Hutus are the ones who are being left out, even though there's a lot of them. And so over time, there's an animosity, like a hatred that grows between the Hutus and the Tutsis. All of a sudden, the Belgians are kind of picking favorites and they're pitting these sides against one another. And the only thing that's preventing these two groups of people from fighting each other is the Belgians in the middle. They're the ones who have the guns, they have the soldiers, they're in charge of the country, they're keeping the peace. Well, everything kind of falls apart in the 1960s when the Belgians leave. This is known as the end of imperialism. You guys will learn more about this when you take social studies classes in high school, especially world history and U.S. history. But essentially in the 1950s and 60s, a lot of these European countries that were running Africa, they leave. And so all of a sudden, you have that security blanket that's gone in Rwanda. And what do you think is going to happen? Well, there's a vacuum. Essentially, like there's an opening now for somebody to step in and take charge of the country. And now both Hutus and Tutsis want it. So a civil war takes place over a period of about 20 years. Sporadic fighting takes place, and it really doesn't come to a head until 1994. In 1994, the president of the country is assassinated. He is actually on his way. He's in a plane on his way to sign a peace deal between the Tutsis and the Hutus, and his plane is shot out of the sky. The Tutsis are blamed for this, and a massive civil war takes place between the Hutus and the Tutsis, and the Hutus, making up the majority of the population, begin to take vengeance on anybody that is Tutsi. And keep in mind, they can pick people out because they know through friends, they can pick you out by your physical appearance, you're taller, and also the Tutsis have to carry around an identification card. So if they look at your identification card and it says Tutsi on it, you're in really big trouble. And the Hutus at the time were using their main method, their main weapon is a machete. So they're not just focusing on males, on men, they're trying to kill anybody that's a Tutsi. And so in a period of about 3 months, over 800,000 people are killed at the hands of these Hutus who are seeking vengeance. And it's men, it's women, it's children, it's anybody who's a Tutsi. And this is an extraordinary amount of people being killed in such a short period of time. Just to give you an idea, the vast majority of you, I'm sure, have heard about the Holocaust. Holocaust, World War II, the extermination of Jews at the hands of the Nazis. Around 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis in about 5 years. 6 million in about 5 years. Nearly 1 million people were killed at the hands of the Hutu in 3 months. You know, if you put that into context, that's a staggering number of deaths in such a short period of time. And the group that really should have stepped in and kept the peace and restored power is the United Nations. But the United Nations really did nothing. They didn't commit enough troops. They didn't realize how bad the situation was there. They are supposed to be in charge of keeping the peace in the world. And the United Nations absorbed a lot of the blame here for not doing more to prevent massive death and a civil war. So you might be wondering, how did this end? Well, after about 3 months, the United Nations finally did step in more. There was a Tutsi army that came up from the south and restored order. And today, Rwanda is a complete country again. Power is shared between Hutus and Tutsis, but there is still a legacy that remains, like this distrust. Hutus and Tutsis don't exactly trust one another. There's still concerns about a civil war that could start again. And so this is a great example of when you have one people, Rwandans, but they just have a difference, and how sometimes that difference, if you let if you don't let cooler heads prevail, that difference could spark massive violence and a massive civil war. Here's the link that I talked about. I promised a link to each of you. If you were to click on at the bottom, it says Hotel Rwanda. Hotel Rwanda is a cool movie. I usually show it in my geography class. I'll play the trailer for you right now. So Hotel Rwanda gives a really good, accurate description of the events that took place during the 3 months of the Rwanda genocide. Don Cheadle is in it. I don't know if you know heard of Don Cheadle. He's been in like some Avengers movies. He plays a real life character. It's based on true events. He plays this Hutu hotel keeper who takes people in who are seeking refuge from the genocide, and he has to protect these people and keep the Hutu soldiers out. And it's a really good story, and it's all true. It's based on true events. So I'll play the trailer for you, and it's on Amazon. You're welcome to rent it and check it out. And I think it's rated PG-13. So.
My name is Paul Rusesabagina. I am the house manager of the most luxurious hotel in the capital of Rwanda.
All right, so I show a few movies. I'm not a huge movie teacher. You know, some teachers show a ton of movies. I show a few. One of the movies that I do show every year is Hotel Rwanda to my geography classes. And every year, all the kids tell me that's their favorite movie of the class to watch. So again, it's on Amazon. If you're looking to get more of an in-depth understanding of what happened during the Rwanda genocide, check that movie out. And again, I'm only going to gloss over some of the background information for each event. So there's plenty of reading, videos, movies about the Rwanda genocide. So you're welcome to check them out on your own. Does anybody have any questions so far? All right, moving on. Shifting gears to another part of the world. It's not going on as much as it was about 10 to 20 years ago, but it still helps it's still good to appreciate what's going on there. This is the United Kingdom. This area on the right, bottom right, this map. The United Kingdom is composed of four states. We call them states. They're also known as countries. Geographically correct term is states. You have Wales, England, which is the most notable. England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So you'll notice that in this map here, one state is left out, and that's Ireland. So at one time, Ireland was a part of the United Kingdom, but Ireland shares a big has a big difference with the rest of the United Kingdom. And that difference that they have compared to the rest of that organization is religion. The vast majority of the Irish people are Catholic. The vast majority of the rest of the United Kingdom, from Northern Ireland to Scotland to England and Wales, those people there are Protestants. So both of these groups are part of one religion. Does anybody know what that religion is? Both Catholics and Protestants are from the same religion. What religion is that?
Christian.
Yeah, they're both Christian. Where they disagree, and if you watched the video yesterday I made on religion, where they disagree is about the sacraments, about communion, the interpretation of Jesus Christ,
Baptism.
texture. So because of that, Protestants and Catholics at times have very specific differences, and these differences have sometimes come to a head and caused violence or conflict. And one of the places that's occurred is in Ireland. Again, Ireland was once colonized by the English, and over time, England gave Ireland their independence. And some people wanted to be free. They wanted to be Irish. They don't consider themselves British or English. They consider themselves Irish. So they created their own country here, which is also shown in the map up top. All the blue is considered the Republic of Ireland. They're an independent state. They're a member of the United Nations, but they're not part of the United Kingdom. But this one yellow section right up here, or red if you're looking at this map, opted to remain with the English. They opted to remain with the United Kingdom. And that area is known as Northern Ireland. Does anybody know why those people opted to remain with the United Kingdom? Anybody want to take a guess?
Fear.
What's that?
Fear.
Fear? Not exactly. No, not fear. It has to do with a cultural difference that these people have with the rest of the country, with the rest of Ireland. Anybody want to take a guess? What do you think is the difference that these two groups have? What's the dividing line?
Is that section Protestant?
Religion?
Yes, very good. This yellow section, or if you're looking down here, this red section is Protestant. And so because they wanted to remain with England, they saw their allegiance, who they looked up to, not to the Irish government, they saw their allegiance to the English government. And so these people are known as Irish nationalists. They see their background and their heritage in Ireland, not so much with England, and they're Catholic. And so a civil war essentially broke out between these pro-nationalist Catholics and these pro-United Kingdom Protestants. They're known as the Ulster Protestants. And it got to the point where the Catholics formed what's known as the Irish Republican Army. They're commonly called the IRA. If you come from an Irish background like myself, or an English background, and you talk to your parents or your grandparents and you ask them about the IRA is a very divisive group. You know, some people in Ireland that are Catholics, they support the IRA. They think what the IRA did was right. Whereas you might talk to some Protestants and some very pro-English people who have their grandparents coming from England or Scotland or Wales, they would consider the IRA a terrorist group. So the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, was notable for working undercover, wearing plain clothes, and committing bombings, blowing up British schools, British hospitals, British military bases, doing everything in their power to try and get the British to leave Ireland and to get the Protestants to leave Northern Ireland. There was an event known as Bloody Sunday in which British soldiers killed about 30 Catholic Irish citizens in cold blood, which just made this situation even worse. And so today, if you were to travel to Ireland, Ireland is a very beautiful country. It's a big tourism hotspot. I would love to travel to Ireland myself. I heard the scenery, the geography is beautiful. It's important that you understand the divide that is there between Protestants to the north and Catholics to the south, because you got to be really careful in where you travel and who you talk to about this religious divide. And again, it all centers on culture and religion. So here's a couple pictures for you. This picture to the left, there's a dividing wall that you see here. This is in Belfast. Belfast is the capital in Northern Ireland. This is a wall, a barrier, if you will, that divides Protestants up here and Catholic neighborhoods. So essentially what happened was the Northern Ireland government, to keep people away from each other because they realized there was so much fighting going on, to keep these people at bay, they built a wall to keep them from committing violence. And sometimes people commit graffiti, they paint. This is a great example of prepared for peace, but ready for war. This is a pro-Irish monument in Northern Belfast. And so today that legacy is still there. There's still a lot of animosity or hatred between Catholics and Protestants, especially in Northern Ireland. Questions so far? So if you do have like an English heritage, like I'm sure some of you do, or an Irish heritage like myself, like my grandfather hated the English. He was very pro-Irish. I remember watching a couple movies when I was a kid, and the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, was in it, and he made some comments that my grandmother kind of had to quiet him down. He was very opinionated about that. And so if you get a chance, talk to somebody if you got that background like I do. All right. Any questions? The next group you're going to learn about is the people known as the Kurds. This is considered Kurdistan. We're going to travel to Southwest Asia. We're kind of moving across the globe to give you an appreciation of what's going on around the globe. The Kurds, these are the people here. These are the Kurdish people. These are some Kurdish women that have volunteered to fight as soldiers. More on that in a second. These are some more young Kurdish soldiers that you see here. The Kurds, they're a Muslim people, Islamic Muslim people who live in Southwest Asia, Turkey, Iraq, Pakistan, Syria, Iran. The problem that they have is that culturally, the way they dress, the language they speak, the customs are different from the rest of the Muslims who live there. And so because of that, they don't see themselves as Turkish. They don't see themselves as Iraqi or Syrian. They see themselves as Kurdish because of their customs, their shared heritage that's been passed down for hundreds of years. And so they want their own home. They're a great example, and they're a rare example of a people who don't have a home. You know, we have a home, United States of America. French people, Germans, Japanese, they have their own country they can go to. They do not. The Kurdish people were given a home. This is kind of a tragic story. Right after World War I ended in 1918, the Kurdish people were given a home by the Europeans, and then it was taken away 3 years later. They're like, nah, we decided we're not going to do that. We changed our minds. So imagine doing all of this. Like, this is hundreds of years in the making, fighting to get your own country. You get it, and then 3 years later, it's taken away from you. Like, how disappointing and depressing would that be? And so the Kurdish people live in this area. So this is where you'd find, if you wanted to find the vast majority of Kurdish people in the world, you're going to find them right in here. And notice that they spill over into several countries: Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. They don't have their own country, though. And so because of that, they have been fighting. That's why I show you some pictures of these Kurdish fighters. They have been fighting to create their own country. They've been advocating to the United Nations, the main peacekeeping organization in the world. It hasn't really worked. At times, they've been subjected to genocide. Does anybody know what genocide means? I mentioned that in the Rwanda genocide. We should really talk for a second about what genocide is, because that's important.
Like genocide killing off like a whole group of like certain people.
Yes, very good. What genocide is a group of people trying to exterminate or eradicate another group of people because of differences. Usually it's because of culture, language, it's religion, it's belief. And so the Iraqi government, right here under Saddam Hussein in the 1990s, began to use chemical weapons, chemical gases against the Kurdish people, killed off hundreds of thousands of them. But they still fight to this day. If you want to do a little bit of reading, you can click on that. The tragic thing about this is that the Kurdish people have really been pro-American. They've helped us in our war against Saddam Hussein in the early 2000s. They've helped U.S. forces in the fighting against ISIS, a Muslim terrorist group. But we really haven't been able to give them their own country. So this is something that continues to be in the news to this day. And the Kurds are a great example of a people without a home, a nation without a state. So, questions on the Kurds? All right, we got a few left, and then we'll be finished up for the day. Afghanistan and the Taliban. The Taliban, if you transition a little bit farther north into Southwest Asia or Western Asia, the Taliban are a militant Islamic group that believes in the strict interpretation of the Quran. The Quran is like the Bible of Islam, the religion of Islam, and they believe that people should do exactly what the Quran, their Bible, says. So they're very, very traditional. And so what they believe in is that people have to be Muslim. And if you're not Muslim, you're considered an infidel. You're considered an inferior, and you're subjected to punishments. They believe that the Holy Lands, which like this area you see here, Iran and Pakistan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia to the south, they believe that those are holy lands that are only for Muslims. So anybody who lives there that's not a Muslim, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, or Hindus, those are considered infidels in their eyes. Those are non-believers. And so because of that, they want those people out of there. So the reason I bring this up is because at one time, and we still have troops there, if you go a little bit farther south of Iraq, the Holy Land is Saudi Arabia, and the United States has had troops in Saudi Arabia for a long time. They're considered one of our allies in a lot of regards. And Osama bin Laden, who I'm sure almost all of you have heard of, he was once the leader of the Taliban, and he wanted U.S. troops out and any other non-believers out of this area. And so he called for us to leave. We didn't listen. And so the main reason that he had his forces hijack planes and fly them into the World Trade Centers and the Pentagon was because of this. He believed that anybody who didn't follow the Quran and Islamic law was a non-believer. And he started what his mind was a holy war. He was committing a holy war against U.S. forces. So over time, the United States government has supported the Afghanistan government here in its fight against the Taliban. Afghanistan is essentially going through a civil war and has been for a long time. The Taliban is also notable for their harsh treatment and persecution of women and non-believers, because in their eyes, they believe that a woman's role is in the home. Women should provide to the men. They should be housewives. They should take care of children, work on the fields and in the farms. They shouldn't get an education. They shouldn't be allowed the right to vote or hold a job outside of the home. So women who have spoken up about this have been killed. They've been tortured. This link here, if you're looking for a great story about a brave young girl from Pakistan, which is this country right here, who stood up to the Taliban. Her name is Malala Yousafzai. They made a movie about her. She's written a book. She's gone on speaking tours around the world. So in a nutshell, She has her own website now. This is the link to her website. Malala believed that all women should have the right to an education. They should be able to go to school. And so she started a website about this. She went on speaking tours. And one day when she was on her bus going to school, Taliban gunmen boarded her bus and shot her point blank in the face. Miraculously, she was able to survive. And instead of, an event like that would scare a lot of people and probably give them a message like, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. It isn't worth it. She didn't believe in that. She continued to speak out. She wasn't intimidated by the Taliban, and she's continued to advocate for equal treatment of all people and equal treatment of women. Link this is her website. It's a great uplifting story. So, and it's a very brave story. So she runs a lot of charities now to try and help women throughout the world. And she has a lot of initiatives that you're welcome to check out. So questions on the Taliban or Malala Yousafzai? All right, two more. If we went a little farther east into South Asia, this is considered South Asia. The green country here is Pakistan, and the orange country is India. At one time, this was all one country, ruled by the English. It was an English colony. When the English left after World War II in 1947, the English realized they had a problem, and the problem was religion. Here it is, religion rearing its head again, causing issues between two groups of people. And the two groups of people were both Indian, but one was Muslims and one were Hindus. Two very opposite religions who butted heads and didn't like each other. So the solution to this that the British came up with, well, instead of keeping all these people together, let's separate them. It's like a fight. You separate people in a fight. And so what they did is the British essentially created a home for all Muslims, Pakistan to the west, and you don't see it here, but Bangladesh to the east. And that's where they put the Muslims. And they allowed the Hindus to keep India. So over time, Pakistan, Bangladesh work together, and India is a pro-U.S. ally. It's a very quick-growing economy. It's democratic. They're very productive. They're considered to be one of the top-growing economies in the world. They have a lot of differences with Pakistan, and both countries have nuclear weapons. And this is something that from time to time, they have small battles with each other, usually around what's known as the Kashmir region. It's this region to the north that's kind of a contested area. Both sides claim it. Both sides say, hey, Kashmir's ours. And so because of that, there's been some fighting that's gone on. There was a recent battle about 3 months ago between Pakistan and Indian forces in which a few soldiers were killed. So if you'd like to read more about that, you're welcome to check that out. This is an ongoing situation. This hasn't de-escalated. There's still a lot of animosity between Pakistan and India. And kind of a cool little fact about this, each day there is a border closing ceremony along a border. A border is this dividing line between two countries. So during the day, these borders are open so people can move back and forth and go to work and see friends and family. And then in the evening when the sun sets, they close the border up for the day. And they have what's known as a border closing ceremony, which is kind of fun to watch. Let me pause it for a second here. And so I usually show this in class, and I go around and I kick my legs way up in the air, and I usually strain a hamstring trying to do this. But this is kind of amusing. These are the Indian soldiers here. They are dressed in like their cultural garb. They're in the tan, and when the gate opens, you're going to see the Pakistani soldiers over here in like the dark green. And enjoy. All right. So that takes place every day, and you probably heard a lot of the cheering in the background. The cheering is actually from Pakistani and Indian people who show up on a regular basis in that area to cheer on their soldiers when they lower the flag, and they have a dance off. You saw it right there with your own eyes. They essentially are showing off their cultural pride, saying we are better, and they have a dance off against one another as soldiers. It's kind of a cool concept. Like, imagine like the U.S. soldiers having a dance off with the Canadian soldiers when they close the border for the day. And, you know, you think about things that we have pride in as a country, like our baseball teams and our sports teams, like the Olympics and stuff. To them, that's like their Olympics. They're cheering on their flag, their dancing styles, their heritage when they close the border each day. So kind of cool. Hopefully it never escalates into complete violence. And if you want to check out this video again and try out some of those dance, go for it. Maybe you could stop by in the fall when I'm showing this to some of my geography classes, and you could come see me try out some of these dance moves and rip my hamstring apart. Last one. You guys have hung in there well. This is the last one for the day and for the week. This is something you should really know about because this is happening right now, and I feel like you don't hear a lot about this in the news. And I'll explain why in a second. So everybody's heard of China, and China tends to be a closed society because the government there has a lot of communist ideologies. They believe in controlling the media, the news, controlling what people can look up, can read about, can learn about. And so because of that, they don't have a lot of news come out of the country like here. You know, if something like this was happening in the United States, this would be worldwide news and people would be hearing about it because we're a more open society. There's freedom of the press, freedom of the media and the news. That's not the case in China. So there's a group of people in China known as the Uyghurs. That's how you pronounce that. It's a little hard to pronounce if you look at it. The Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are Muslims. Their affiliation is the Islamic religion. They're Islamic. They're different from the vast majority of Chinese people because the vast majority of Chinese people there are not Muslim. They're into Confucianism or Taoism, or they don't practice the religion at all. Their style of dress, the Uyghur style of dress, their language, their religion, their customs are all different from that of the majority population, the Chinese population. But they're still Chinese. They are from China. They're from that continent. Although the government rejects this, the government considers the Uyghurs outsiders. And there have been some small groups of Uyghurs who have tried to create their own country and have initiated terrorist attacks, very small amounts. And so in response to this, beginning in 2019, the Chinese government, using soldiers, began to round up Uyghur people, men, women, and children, and put them into camps, places that they cannot leave, and force them there against their will. You know, it's not like the Uyghurs have asked for this and prefer to live in these camps. They have taken children and newborns away from their parents and forced them to live in these schools that are surrounded by barbed wire and nobody is allowed in. And in these schools, they conduct what are known as re-education camps. So if you are a Uyghur child, you're taught customs from your parents, from your grandparents, your language, your style of dress, your religion. That is all done away with if you live in one of these schools. You are now taught about Chinese culture, Chinese faiths and religions, about the power of the Chinese government. So essentially, it's a re-education school where I hate to say it, but they brainwash these children and try and steer them away from their customs and their culture and make them something that their parents don't want them to be. There have been reports that women have been forced to have abortions, to become sterile, meaning that they have surgeries where they can no longer have children, have to use birth control. And the whole point behind this is to try and eliminate and control the Uyghur population. So some governments, including our own, claim that China is initiating a genocide, trying to eliminate the Uyghur population. There have been claims that in these re-education camps, these internment camps, the Chinese government is conducting human experiments, organ harvesting. It hasn't been confirmed. These are only reports, but it hasn't been confirmed. And the reason why this isn't a bigger story is because the Chinese government controls the news there. They control the media. So like if you think about the media here, you got CBS and NBC and CNN, others. They're not owned by the US government. You know, they're owned by independent businesses. In China, the Chinese government controls their CBS, their CNN. And so they control what's coming out of the news, which is why you rarely hear about this. And if you were to try and go into these camps or go into these schools where the Uyghur children are located, you're not allowed in. You're not allowed in. They claim that they're schools, that they're helping kids, they're benefiting children and people, and that's the only answer that they're given. This is a really good story and video from Vice News. I've showed this to my geography class at times. It's called They Come For Us. They Come For Us at Night. So you're welcome to check it out and read it. There's a couple of videos that are associated with it too. So this is an ongoing story that I think is worth monitoring. It's even kind of brought, if you're a fan of basketball, the NBA has been drawn into this too, with what's been going on in China recently, in Hong Kong, and with the Uyghur population, because the owner of the Houston Rockets, I forget his first name, his last name, I think David Morey or David Morey, I think his name is. He tweeted out some support for people who stand up to the Chinese government in Hong Kong. And because the NBA has a big market in China, you know, a lot of people in China watch NBA basketball games and are fans of NBA basketball. The NBA has kind of stayed out of this. They don't want to get involved here. And it kind of shows off the power that the Chinese Communist government has. They control the narrative. They control the message here. But if you're interested in looking into it, check that link out. And does anybody have any questions over China and their treatment of Uyghurs? All right, so really quick before we wrap up for the day, I've kept you guys on here for a while. What do all these events share in common? So now answers may vary. There isn't one straight on answer. But in your mind, after reading and learning about all 6 of these events, what's a similarity?
I've noticed that most of them have to do with 2 cultures with separate religions.
Yeah, very good. Has to do with cultural conflicts or culture that butts heads with another culture. Sure. What else?
Countries that are divided.
Yeah, very good. Countries that are divided, usually along like language or religion. Something has to do with culture. Sure. Yep. Anything else?
Like 2 places that are really close together that have different beliefs.
Yeah, very good. I like it.
There's not really any that are solving their conflicts peacefully.
Yeah, very good. These are all examples of places where at least at one point in time, you know, it might be peaceful now, like India, Pakistan, Ireland, Northern Ireland, but at one time there was violence and bloodshed between the rival groups. Yep. Anything else?
There's a lot of genocide.
Yep. Rwanda claims in China. Yep, absolutely. The Kurds. Very good.
Yeah, and it's kind of, they're not really trying to like be peaceful. They're just like, yeah, I don't like, they're not trying. They're not like making an attempt at like talking it out or trying to figure something out. They just go ahead and like be violent.
Yeah, that was my takeaway from this. So my takeaway from this is a couple. points. You hit on it right there. This is the situation where instead of letting cooler heads prevail, like people talking it out and working it out peacefully, you let power. Power is controlling a branch of government, or power is controlling the military or a stockpile of weapons. When power falls in the hands of the wrong people, think of Rwanda. Sounds good. Think of power. Think of Rwanda. In Rwanda, instead of Hutus and Tutsis working it out peacefully, after the president was assassinated, these strongmen took control of the Hutus and they told everybody else what to do. Well, let's face it. It's not like every Hutu in the country wanted to commit genocide. No, it was a handful of people who brainwashed the rest and talked everybody into doing this. In China, it's not like all Chinese people have an animosity or a hatred of Uyghurs. It's a group of people who convinced the rest to perform something like this. So to me, this is a good example of when you don't let cooler heads prevail and you let power be concentrated in the hands of a small group of people. And that's why, if there's an important takeaway, it's that government is necessary to keep the peace. And if you let government fall into the hands of a small group of people who are hotheads and don't share the views of everyone, this is what could happen. Genocide, conflict, wars. So anything else that you guys learned or takeaways from this?
That just reminded me of the quote that when the love of power overcomes the power of love, the world will know peace. Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, that's a good one. Who's the author of that quote?
Jimi Hendrix.
Jimi
I'm
Hendrix.
pretty sure.
Nice. I got one to back that up. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So like power can be a corrupting force. It can make people evil. But when you control power, when you have all power, absolute power, when you control everything, think of like Adolf Hitler. It corrupts everything. It can ruin everything. Look at the U.S. Civil War. The U.S. Civil War was started because of cultural differences between Northerners and Southerners. Southerners wanted to break away. They wanted slavery. They wanted states' rights. Northerners didn't see that way. And because cooler heads didn't prevail in time, you have large-scale bloodshed right here in our own country. So every country is guilty at some point in their history of not letting cooler heads prevail. And that's, again, this highlights the importance of government talking it out, being able to work together. So, any other questions or thoughts as we wrap up the day? So I hope you found it interesting. Maybe there's one event out of the 6 that I brought up that you're like, man, I'd like to read more about that. I'd like to learn more about that. Check out the links that I put in each of the slides. And hopefully by this point, you guys have a better appreciation of what's going on in the world today, because the Kurds, the situation in China, the situation in India and Pakistan, those are all modern events that are still ongoing that haven't been resolved yet. So that's it for the day. So I know it's 9 o'clock. Map quizzes. Let me just take you through that really quick. Map quizzes. And then if you go to assignments, there is a quiz right there called Cultural Conflicts Quiz. Make sure you get that done. If you haven't taken either of these quizzes yet, make sure you do so. On folk versus popular culture and religion, I'm going to start putting those grades in later today. And then come back in a couple hours, and I won't take nearly as much of your time. We'll do a quick review of the unit, and tomorrow will be the test. Any questions? All right, guys, thanks for hanging with me this morning. Nice job. I will talk to you in a couple hours.